The first body we found was standing up. I have never included that detail in any of the 4 affidavits I filed with the Harlan County Sheriff's Office between 1891 and 1903. I omitted it because I understood, even at 26 years of age, that certain facts discredit the witness who reports them. A dead man lying in the woods is an event the law can process. A dead man standing upright, propped between 2 jack pines with his arms arranged at his sides and his chin raised as though listening to something in the canopy, is not. His name was Virgil Sloan, 51 years old, born in Letcher County, father of 4 boys, the youngest of whom was 9 and had a cleft palate that Virgil had been saving to have corrected by a surgeon in Lexington. I know this because Virgil told me about it the evening before he died, and he showed me a tin box where he kept the money, $37 in paper notes and coin. He was almost halfway there. My name is Joel. I find old accounts of things that happened to working people in dangerous places, things that were left out of official records and never spoken of again. If you've got a story of your own, the link to submit it is in the description. And if you want more of these, subscribing is the best way to make that happen. Virgil had been dead for approximately 6 hours when we found him. The temperature that morning was 28 degrees. His body was rigid. His eyes were open and dry. His clothing was undisturbed. No tears, no mud, no indication of struggle. His boots were clean, which should not have been possible given that the ground between our camp and where he was found was a 1/4 mile of creek-bottom mud that would suck a man's boot to the ankle. The ground around Virgil's body was undisturbed. I examined it carefully. The leaves were unbroken. The moss on the north side of both jack pines was intact. No drag marks, no boot prints other than our own approaching from the southeast. The Virgil Sloan had arrived at that spot between 2 trees without, as far as the physical evidence indicated, touching the ground. I measured the distance from our camp, 1,260 feet. I measured it with the surveyor's chain we used to lay out still sites, and I recorded the number in the same ledger where I kept production notes and delivery schedules. That ledger still exists in a box under my bed. The number has not changed. The coroner in Harlantown listed cause of death as heart failure. He did not examine the body. He took the sheriff's verbal report and wrote heart failure on a form and filed it. I know this because I walked to Harlantown myself and asked to see the finding. The clerk showed it to me, 1 page, no examination notes, no mention of the body's posture or position, no mention of the clean boots or the undisturbed ground. I asked the clerk if the coroner intended to examine the body. The clerk said the body had already been buried. I asked when. He said the same day it was brought down. Virgil Sloan was dead and buried and officially explained within 36 hours of his discovery, and the explanation required no evidence beyond a sheriff's verbal account relayed to a coroner who never left his office. 7 men went up Pine Mountain to run whiskey. In February of 1891, I was one of them. By mid-April, 3 were dead, and 1 had lost the capacity for speech and did not recover it in the remaining 19 years of his life. The county records attribute the 3 deaths to various natural causes: heart failure, exposure, animal attack. The last one, animal attack, was the closest any official document came to acknowledging what was on that mountain with us. And even that was qualified in a subsequent filing as probable bear encounter, unwitnessed. None of these findings are accurate. I filed 4 affidavits between 1891 and 1903 attempting to correct the record. Each was received by the sheriff's office. None produced any response. I do not know if they were read. I do not know if they still exist. I am 78 years old. I have emphysema. The doctor in Harlan tells me my lungs are producing approximately half the air a man my age needs, and that the fraction will decrease. He speaks about this with the same matter-of-fact tone I'm attempting to use now, which is the tone of a man who has accepted an outcome and is organizing what remains. What remains for me is this account. Not an affidavit, not a filing for the sheriff's office, a record. The only accurate one that will exist because I am the last person alive who knows what happened on Pine Mountain, and the institutions that should have preserved that knowledge chose instead to write heart failure on a form and move on to the next piece of paper. This is what I saw, This is what I measured. This is what I can swear to with the same certainty I have about my own name. Something lived on Pine Mountain in the winter of 1891. It walked on two legs. It was not a man, and it was not a bear, and it was not anything that belongs in the catalog of creatures that the Commonwealth of Kentucky or the United States government has seen fit to recognize. The Moonshiners of Harlan County had a name for it, though they did not use the name often and never in full daylight. They called it the Dogman. I'm going to tell you why. The operation was Buford Sykes's idea. Buford was the closest thing our outfit had to a leader, though he would not have described himself that way and would have resented anyone else doing it. He was 44 years old, lean in the way that mountain men are lean, which is to say stripped of anything the body doesn't require for the work at hand. He had been making whiskey since he was 15 and had served 2 years in the state penitentiary at Frankfort for the same, an experience he rarely discussed, except to note that the food was worse than what he fed his hogs and the guards were stupider. Buford's plan was simple in the way that plans made by experienced men often are. The revenue agents had been working the hollows hard that winter. 3 stills seized in December alone, 2 in January. The agents were learning the terrain, which meant the terrain had to change. Buford proposed moving operations up Pine Mountain above 3,000 feet to a shelf of flat ground he'd scouted the previous autumn near the headwaters of Catron Creek. The location had water, timber for fuel, and a natural rock overhang that would disperse the smoke from the fire. More importantly, it was a 6-hour climb from the nearest road, through laurel thickets so dense a man had to crawl in places, and the revenue agents were not, in Buford's assessment, men who crawled. He was correct about that, as it turned out. The revenue agents never found us. What found us was something else. Buford recruited 6 men. I will name them here because the official record names only 3, and only in the context of their deaths, and a man is more than the manner of his dying. Virgil Sloan, 51, Letcher County, the eldest of the group and the most experienced distiller. He could taste a batch and tell you within a day when the grain had been milled. His youngest boy, the one with the cleft palate, was named William. Earl Combs, 38, Harlan County, born and raised, a large, quiet man who had worked timber camps since he was 14 and still carried a scar across his left palm from a crosscut, saw that jumped its kerf when he was 17. He had a wife, Della, who packed his provisions with a specificity that suggested she had committed his preferences to memory. Funny, his cornbread was wrapped separately from his fatback because Earl did not like them touching. I noticed this. It struck me as an act of considerable devotion. Tom Saylor, 29, originally from Bell County but had been living in a cabin on Martin's Fork for 3 years. Tom was the youngest, besides myself, and had a nervous energy that made him useful for tasks requiring sustained attention. He could watch a still for 12 hours without losing focus. He kept a Bible in his coat pocket, though I never saw him read it. When I asked him about it once, he said it was his mother's and he carried it for the weight of it, not the words. Dale Messer, 46, Harlan County. Dale was Buford's cousin and had a reputation for 2 things: an almost preternatural ability to navigate wooded terrain in darkness, and a complete inability to stop talking. He narrated his own actions as he performed them, a habit that irritated everyone except Buford, who claimed it was useful because you always knew where Dale was. Dale had a daughter in Evarts who had recently had a baby, making Dale a grandfather, a status he mentioned at every opportunity and with undisguised pride. Amos Black, 53, the oldest man in the group and the quietest. Amos had been a coal miner at the Creech operation near Lynch before the tunnel collapse in 1884 that killed 6 men and left Amos with a right leg that bent slightly inward at the knee. He walked with a hitch that slowed him on flat ground, but seemed to make no difference on inclines, as though his body had recalibrated itself for mountain terrain specifically. Amos never discussed his family, and I did not ask. I learned after the events on Pine Mountain that he had a brother in Whitesburg who was a minister. The brother conducted Amos's funeral. I was not present. And myself. James Calloway, 26 at the time, unmarried, no children. I'd been running whiskey for Buford Sykes for 2 years, primarily as a carrier, moving product down the mountain to buyers in the towns along the Poor Fork. I was included in the Pine Mountain operation because I was young and strong, and because I had no family who would come looking for me if I failed to return on schedule. Buford said that last part plainly the evening he offered me the job. "You're useful because nobody will miss you for a while." He did not intend it as cruelty. He was stating a logistical fact. In the moonshine trade, a man without attachments is an operational asset. There is no wife to raise alarm after 3 days, no mother to send a brother with a rifle. I understood this. I accepted the terms. I had my own reasons for wanting the work, which were financial and not complicated, and I did not think about Buford's observation again until much later, when it acquired a weight he could not have anticipated when he made it. We assembled at Buford's cabin on Clover Fork on the morning of February 11th, 1891. The temperature was 19 degrees. The sky was clear, and the air had that particular stillness that settles on the Kentucky mountains in deep winter, when the cold is so thorough that the world seems to have contracted around itself. Sounds carried. I could hear Earl Combs's mule on the trail a quarter mile below us, the creak of the pack frame and the animal's breathing. Buford had prepared the provisions the night before. 200 pounds of corn, 50 pounds of sugar, yeast, 2 copper condensers he'd built himself, a large pot for the mash, and assorted tools. The weight was distributed across 3 mules. Our personal provisions, clothing, blankets, food, ammunition, we carried ourselves. I estimated my pack at 45 pounds. It did not feel heavy at the trailhead. It would feel heavy later. We started up the mountain at 7 in the morning. Buford led. Dale followed, talking. The rest of us strung out along the trail in the order we'd arrived, which put me near the back with Tom Saylor, who walked with his hands in his coat pockets and his head slightly forward, as though leaning into the climb before the climb had properly begun. The trail followed Catron Creek for the first mile, but then switched back into the Laurel on the north face. The laurel was dense enough that the path narrowed to a single man's width, and the branches met overhead in a lattice that reduced the light to a gray-green twilight even at mid-morning. The mules objected to this section. Earl's mule stopped 3 times and had to be pulled forward by the halter, its eyes showing white. I noted this but did not attach significance to it. Mules are contrary animals. Their reluctance to enter dark enclosed spaces is not evidence of anything beyond the ordinary stubbornness of their kind. We climbed for 4 hours. The trail rose approximately 1,800 feet in that distance, which I calculated afterward using Buford's barometric readings and a topographic sketch I made of the route. The air thinned. The laurel gave way to hemlock, and then to a mixed stand of oak and chestnut that opened the canopy enough to see the sky again. The relief of open sky after 4 hours in the laurel tunnel was physical. I felt my shoulders drop. I had not realized I'd been holding them tight. Buford's shelf was everything he'd described, a flat area roughly 80 feet long and 40 feet wide, protected on the north side by a rock face that rose another 30 feet above the shelf. The rock overhang extended 12 feet from the face, creating a natural roof under which the still could operate with minimal visible smoke. Water came from a spring that emerged from a crack in the rock face at the eastern end. The water was cold and clean and had a faintly mineral taste that Buford said would improve the whiskey. He was particular about water. The southern edge of the shelf dropped away into a steep ravine choked with rhododendron and fallen timber. The only practical approach was from the west, along the trail we'd climbed. A single man with a rifle could hold that approach against a dozen. It was, in short, an excellent position, remote, defensible, well-watered, with natural concealment for the smoke. I understood why Buford had chosen it. What I did not understand, and what I should have considered more carefully, was why no one else had ever used it. We made camp that afternoon. Buford and Virgil set up the still under the overhang. Earl and Amos gathered wood. Dale and Tom and I cleared a flat area for sleeping and erected a lean-to using canvas and ridge poles cut from the surrounding timber. The work was familiar and efficient. By nightfall, we had a functioning camp, a fire, a still ready for the first mash, and the settled feeling of men who have arrived at a place where they intend to stay for a while. Buford cooked cornbread and fatback over the fire. We ate in the way that working men eat after a long climb, which is to say, thoroughly and in near silence. Afterward, Buford poured a small amount of whiskey from a jug he'd carried up for the purpose and passed it around. The whiskey was from his last batch, made in the hollow below. It was good, smooth, with a bite at the finish that warmed the chest. Virgil showed me the tin box that evening. We were sitting apart from the others, near the edge of the shelf where you could look south across the ridgeline and see the dark shapes of mountains fading into the distance. The moon was 3/4 full, and the visibility was good. And he opened the box carefully, the way you handle something whose contents represent more than their face value. The money was arranged by denomination, bills folded in thirds, coins stacked. He did not count it in front of me but told me the amount, $37. "Surgeon in Lexington says he can fix William's mouth," Virgil said. "Says it's a straightforward procedure, $80, including the train fare and 2 nights boarding." I asked how long he'd been saving. 3 years. He closed the box. "This run should get me the rest if the price holds. Buford says 40 cents a gallon to the buyers in Middlesboro. 20 gallons a week for 6 weeks. That's my share at about $10, maybe 12 if the quality's good." He looked at the tin box for a moment before putting it back inside his coat. "William asks about it every time I come home. Whether we have enough yet. He's 9. He doesn't understand the arithmetic. He just knows his face is different from the other boys' faces, and his father has been promising to fix it." I did not know what to say to this. I was 26 and had no children and no particular understanding of what it meant to carry a promise you were not certain you could keep. I said something about the price holding, or the quality being good. I don't remember the specific words. What I remember is the way Virgil put the tin box away, the precision of the gesture, the way his hands were careful with it, as though the box contained something more fragile than money. Virgil Sloan was dead within 9 days. The tin box was not recovered with his personal effects. I do not know what happened to it. I do not know whether William ever had his surgery. I tried to locate the family in 1904 when I filed my last affidavit, but the Sloans had left Letcher County and no one I spoke to knew where they had gone. The first 3 days on the shelf were uneventful. We established a routine. Buford and Virgil managed the still, which required constant attention. The rest of us rotated between gathering wood, maintaining the fire, hauling water, and standing watch on the western approach. Buford insisted on the watch, not because he expected revenue agents to find us that quickly, but because Buford was a man who operated on the principle that the time to prepare for trouble was before trouble arrived. I took the night watch on February 13th, our second night. The shift ran from midnight to 4 in the morning. I sat on a flat rock near the western edge of the shelf, with Buford's Sharps rifle across my knees and a small fire at my back, close enough for warmth, but far enough that it would not ruin my night vision. The mountain was quiet in the way that mountains are quiet in winter, which is not truly quiet at all. The trees made sounds as the cold worked on them, contraction noises, sharp and percussive, like small caliber gunfire at a distance. Occasionally something moved in the rhododendron below the shelf, a rustle, and then silence. I attributed these sounds to animals. Deer, most likely. Perhaps a raccoon or possum. At approximately 2 in the morning, the sounds stopped. I noticed this the way you notice the absence of something you have been hearing without consciously registering. To one moment, the night had its usual texture of small sounds. The next, it was silent, not quiet. Silent. The distinction is meaningful. Quiet is the reduction of sound. Silence is its elimination. The trees stopped cracking. The rhododendron stopped rustling. Even the spring, which made a constant trickling sound where it ran across the rock face, seemed diminished, though I suspect that was my perception and not an actual change in the water's behavior. I sat in that silence for approximately 10 minutes. I know the duration because I was tracking time by the position of the moon relative to the ridgeline, a rough method, but adequate for the purpose. During those 10 minutes, I became aware of a smell. I want to describe this accurately because I would encounter it again many times over the following weeks, and each time it preceded an event I would later need to account for. The smell was organic and warm, which is to say it had the quality of a living thing's scent rather than the scent of something dead or vegetable. The closest comparison I can offer is wet dog, but that is not precisely right. It was ranker than that, heavier. There was an undertone of something musky and glandular, the kind of smell that implies a large animal in close proximity. I had smelled bears before. It was not bear. Bear has a sweetness underneath the musk. This had no sweetness. It was sour and dense, and it settled at the back of the throat. I stood up. I brought the rifle to my shoulder and scanned the tree line to the west. The moonlight was adequate. I could see individual trunks at 30 yards. I could see the trail where it emerged from the tree line at 40 yards. I saw nothing out of place. The smell persisted for perhaps 3 more minutes, then faded. The small sounds returned. The trees cracked. Something rustled in the rhododendron. The spring sounded normal. I did not report this to Buford in the morning. I did not know what I would have reported. A silence and a smell are not actionable intelligence. They are atmosphere. And atmosphere does not warrant waking a man who has been tending a still for 16 hours. This was a mistake, though I could not have known it at the time. The following evening, February 14th, Dale Messer found the tracks. He found them along the creek bed approximately 200 yards below our shelf, in a patch of soft ground where the water had thawed the frost. Dale had gone down to check our water supply line, a length of hollowed-out laurel trunk that we'd rigged to channel water from the creek to a holding barrel near the still. He came back up the slope faster than I'd ever seen Dale move, which was notable because Dale generally operated at a pace that suggested he had arrived at an agreement with the physical world to take things easy. He was not talking. That was the first thing I noticed. Dale Messer, who narrated his own existence as a matter of course, was silent. His face had a gray undertone beneath the weathering. "Buford," he said, just the name. Buford looked at him, set down the hydrometer he'd been using to check the mash, didn't say anything, just looked. "You need to come see this," Dale said. We all went. The 6 of us followed Dale down the slope to the creek bed, which was a steep descent through hemlock and loose shale that required the use of hands in places. The patch of soft ground was easy to find because the tracks were visible from 20 feet away. They were large. That was the first observation and the most obvious. I crouched beside the nearest print and placed my hand inside it for scale. My hand, fingers spread, did not reach the edges. The print was roughly 14 inches long and 6 inches wide. It sank 2 inches into ground that was firm enough to bear my full weight without leaving more than a 1/4 inch impression. I tested this by standing on the same surface. My boot, at approximately 160 pounds of body weight distributed through a 10-inch sole, barely dented the ground. Whatever had left these prints was significantly heavier than I was, or significantly more concentrated in how it distributed its weight. The shape was wrong. That was the second observation, and the one that caused the silence among the group. The prints were not bear. Bear prints show a wide pad with 5 toes arranged in an arc and claw marks extending beyond the toes. These prints showed a long, narrow pad, almost rectangular, with 4 toes, not 5, arranged in a forward-facing row. The toes were thick and blunt, like a dog's, but the overall print was 3 to 4 times larger than any dog I had ever tracked. And the stride was wrong. That was the third observation, and the one that I found most difficult to reconcile with any animal I knew. The prints alternated left and right in a straight line, the way a man's prints alternate when he walks. Not the way a quadruped's prints arrange themselves, which is in offset pairs. These prints tracked in a single line, left, right, with a stride length I measured at approximately 42 inches. A man my height, 5 feet 10 inches, has a natural stride of roughly 30 inches. A man 6.5 feet tall might stretch to 36 inches in a hurry. Whatever left these prints had a stride of 42 inches, and the depth and spacing suggested it was not hurrying. The intervals were even. The pace was steady. This was the natural gait of something large, walking upright on 2 legs following the creek bed in a straight line toward the base of our shelf. The tracks ended at the shale slope below our camp. Shale doesn't take prints. Whatever it was had walked to the base of our position and then either turned back or gone up. I looked at the shale. It was undisturbed, but shale is not a reliable medium for tracking. Flat stones shift under any weight and settle back to roughly their original position. No one spoke for a long time. The six of us stood in the creek bed, looking at the prints and not looking at each other. Earl Combs broke the silence. "That ain't bear," he said. "No," Buford said. "What is it then?" Buford did not answer immediately. He was crouching over one of the prints, running his finger along the edge of the toe impression, the way a man examines something he wants to memorize. When he stood up, his expression was the expression of a man making a calculation. "Amos," he said, "you grew up in this country. Your people been in these mountains how long?" "Since before the war," Amos said. He meant the revolution, not the recent one. "Your father ever tell you about anything up on Pine Mountain? Anything that walked like a man but wasn't?" Amos was quiet for a while. The creek made sounds around our boots. Somewhere above us, a crow called and received no answer. "My father told me to stay off Pine Mountain at night," Amos said. His father told him the same thing. We never discussed the reason. "But there was a reason," Buford said. "There was a reason." Buford looked at the tracks again. Then he looked up the slope toward our shelf, calculating the distance and the angle. "It came to the base of our camp," he said, "walked right up to us, then left." "Or went up," Tom Saylor said. He had been quiet until then. His hand in his coat pocket where the Bible was. His voice was steady, but his face was not. "If it went up, it was in our camp while we were sleeping," Buford said. He said this with the same tone he used to discuss the specific gravity of MASH as a problem to be measured and solved. "Anyone notice anything out of place this morning?" No one had. "Then it came to the base and turned around, scouting, wanted to know who was here." "Buford," Dale said, and his voice had something in it I had not heard from Dale before, which was an absence of words where words should have been. Dale always had the next sentence ready. Now he was reaching for one and not finding it. "Buford, what is a foot that size and walks on two legs?" Buford straightened up. He looked at each of us, one at a time, the way a man counts assets. "I don't know," he said, "but I'll tell you what it's not. It's not a revenue agent. Revenue agents wear boots. Whatever this is, it's barefoot." He said this as though it settled the matter, and in a way it did. Revenue agents were the threat we'd organized against. This was something else, and something else required different calculations. "Double the watch tonight," Buford said. 2 men at a time, keep the fire high, and nobody goes below the shelf alone." We climbed back up to camp. Behind us, the tracks sat in the soft mud of the creek bed, 14 inches long, 2 inches deep, alternating left and right in the gait of something that walked upright through the mountains of southeastern Kentucky and left prints that no one in our group could identify and no official record would ever acknowledge. I returned to the creek bed the following morning to take measurements. I wanted the numbers in my ledger. By the time I got there, the prints were gone, not filled in by rain or obscured by other tracks. Gone. The soft mud where they'd been was smooth, as though something had worked it flat with the palm of a hand. I stared at that smooth mud for a long time. Then I wrote in my ledger, "Tracks observed February 14th, measured and noted. Tracks absent February 15th. Ground appeared deliberately smoothed." I've never been able to explain this. I'm not going to try now. That second night, the night of the 14th after we found the tracks, Buford paired me with Tom Saylor for the midnight watch. We sat on the flat rock at the western edge of the shelf, 2 rifles between us, the fire built high enough to throw light 30 feet in every direction. The moon was waning, but still bright enough for reasonable visibility. Tom did not speak for the first hour. He sat with his rifle across his knees and his eyes on the tree line and his right hand in his coat pocket holding the Bible. I could see the shape of his fingers through the canvas, working the leather cover the way a man works a worry stone. At 1 a.m, he said, "Jim, you ever hear of the Dogman?" I said I had not. My grandmother used to talk about it. Her people were from the mountains above Pineville. Old family, old knowledge. She said there was something in these mountains that was here before the Cherokee and before the Shawnee and before anyone who had a name to call themselves. She said it walked on 2 legs and had the head of a dog, but it wasn't a dog and it wasn't a man. She said it was something else, something older. I asked him what it wanted. She didn't say it wanted anything. She said it lived here, the way a man lives in a house, and when people came into its territory and stayed, it noticed. And when it noticed, things happened. I asked, what kind of things? Tom was quiet for a while. His hand worked the Bible. People went missing, or they were found dead in ways that didn't make sense, or they came back changed, different, like something had been taken out of them or put in. My grandmother said the old people knew how to live alongside it, knew the rules: don't go out at night, don't follow the sounds, don't look at it directly, leave an offering at the boundary stones. I asked if there were boundary stones on Pine Mountain. I don't know, Tom said. I don't know where the boundary is. That's the problem. We set up camp and we don't know whose ground we're on. We sat with that for a time. The fire cracked and settled. The trees did their cold contraction sounds, sharp little reports in the darkness, normal sounds, the mountain behaving as a mountain behaves in February. Then, at approximately 1:30, the silence came again. It arrived the same way it had the night before, not a gradual dimming of sound, but a cessation. One moment the night had its usual acoustic texture, the next, nothing. The fire still burned, but seemed to make less noise. Even the air felt thicker, as though the silence had a physical quality that pressed against the eardrums. Tom felt it too. He stood up. His rifle came up to his shoulder in a movement so fluid it was clear he'd been expecting this. The smell arrived 30 seconds later. The same warm and sour, glandular heaviness. Stronger this time, closer. I timed it. I do not know why I timed it. Some part of my mind had already begun the process of documentation that would continue for the next 60 years, 30 seconds between the silence and the smell. I noted this. We stood on the flat rock, two young men with rifles, staring into a darkness that had become absolute beyond the firelight. The moon was still above the ridgeline, but its light seemed unable to penetrate the tree line. The shadows between the trunks were solid. Something moved. I saw it at the edge of the firelight, on the western approach, approximately 35 yards from where we stood. I saw it for no more than 2 seconds before it withdrew behind the trunk of a large chestnut oak. What I saw in those 2 seconds, I am going to describe as precisely as I am able. It was tall, significantly taller than any man I have encountered in 78 years of life. I estimated its height at between 7 and 8 feet based on its position relative to a horizontal branch I later measured at 7 feet 4 inches from the ground. Its head was above the branch. It stood upright, fully erect on 2 legs the way a man stands, not hunched, not crouched, not in the posture of a bear rearing up for a better look. Standing, balanced, natural on 2 legs in the way that humans are natural on 2 legs. Its body was covered in dark hair or fur. In the firelight, I could not determine color with certainty, but it appeared black or very dark brown. The hair was not uniform in length, longer on the shoulders and upper arms, shorter on the torso. Its arms were long, proportionally longer than a human's. They hung past the knee line, possibly to mid-shin, though I could not see the lower body clearly. Its head was the wrong shape. That is the detail I need to render precisely because it is the detail that separates this from every other account of large creatures in the eastern mountains. The head was not round. It was elongated forward with a pronounced muzzle. The jawline extended 3 to 4 inches beyond where a human jaw would terminate. The ears were high-set and pointed, rising above the crown of the skull by approximately 2 inches. The head in outline was canine. The head of a very large dog, set on a body that was not a dog's body in any respect. Upright, broad-shouldered, bipedal. Its eyes caught the firelight. These were 2 points of reflected amber, spaced wider apart than human eyes, fixed on our position with the steady, unblinking attention of a predator that is not yet committed to action but is considering it. It looked at us. We looked at it. The interval between the sighting and its withdrawal behind the chestnut oak could not have exceeded 2 seconds, but the perceptual distortion of that interval has stayed with me for 52 years. 2 seconds in which I observed more detail than should have been possible. 2 seconds in which the creature stood in the firelight and allowed itself to be seen, and I understood with a certainty I have never been able to adequately convey in any of my 4 affidavits that it had chosen to be seen, that it was showing itself deliberately, that the revelation was a communication. the nature of which I could not interpret but the intent of which was unmistakable. It was telling us it was there. Tom fired his rifle. I did not fire mine. I do not know why. My hands were on the weapon and my finger was on the trigger, and some mechanism between my brain and my hand refused to complete the circuit. Tom's shot hit the chestnut oak. I heard the impact. The creature was no longer there. It had not run. I want to be clear about this. In the fraction of a second, between Tom's trigger pull and the round striking the tree, the creature was simply no longer occupying the space where it had been. I did not see it move. I did not hear it move. It was there, and then the gun fired, and then it was not. Tom worked the lever on his rifle and stood with the barrel pointed at the tree line, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. I said I could see the barrel moving in small circles against the darkness. "You saw it," he said. "I saw it." "Tell me what you saw," I told him. He listened. His breathing slowed. The barrel's circles tightened. He lowered the rifle. "Dogman," he said. The camp was awake behind us. Buford arrived first, the Sharp's rifle in his hands, barefoot on the cold rock. Then Earl, then Virgil, then Dale, then Amos. They had heard the shot and come out armed and half-dressed in the way that men come out of sleep when a gunshot punctuates it. "What?" Buford said. Tom looked at me. I looked at Tom. I described what I had seen. I gave the height, the posture, the proportions, the head shape, the eye color, the behavior. I gave it the way I would later give it in affidavits that no one would read, flatly, without interpretation. When I finished, no one spoke for a while. The fire cracked. The silence had lifted. Normal sounds had returned. The smell was gone. Dale said, "I'm going home." Buford said, "No, you're not." "Buford, I got a grandbaby in Evarts who needs her granddaddy alive. And you have a share of this operation that's worth more than anything you'll earn between now and spring. You walk off this mountain tonight, in the dark, after what we just heard about what's down there, and you're likelier to die than if you stay put with 6 armed men and a fire." Dale opened his mouth and closed it. The arithmetic was difficult to dispute. "We run the still," Buford said. "We make the whiskey. We sell it in Middlesboro. We go home with money. Whatever that thing is, it looked at us and it left. It had its chance, and it didn't take it." I thought about the tracks in the creek bed, the steady gait, the even spacing, something walking calmly past our camp, taking stock. I thought about the way it had stepped into the firelight for 2 seconds and then withdrawn, the deliberateness of it, the precision. A creature that wanted to be seen and then wanted to not be seen, and accomplished both with an ease that suggested complete control of the interaction. Buford interpreted this as restraint. The creature had its chance and chose not to act. To Buford, this was evidence that it could be coexisted with. I was not certain Buford was right, but I was also not certain he was wrong, and in the absence of certainty, I did what men in the mountains of eastern Kentucky have always done when the calculations are unclear. I stayed. We all stayed. This was the second mistake. The first was not reporting the silence and the smell when I first encountered them. The second was interpreting the creature's restraint as something other than what it was. It was not restraint. I understand that now, 52 years later, with the benefit of everything that followed. The creature was not showing mercy or disinterest. It was doing what Buford himself had identified when he looked at the tracks in the creek bed. It was scouting. It wanted to know who was here. Now it knew.